All right, it looks like we're recording. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to this workshop on identifying and altering your negativity bias. Many of our heroes are already familiar with the concept of the good wolf and the bad wolf, but if you aren't, don't worry. I will take some time to explore its meaning before we dive into really how it relates to our lives. But to kick us off, I really just wanted to introduce myself and Gage, who will be really leading this workshop for you all today. My name is Dr. Lauren Flynn. I'm the lead therapist here at Flowly, and I'll hand it over to you, Gage.
Yeah, welcome everyone. Name's Gage Gorski. Also a provider here with Flowly, and super excited to be able to put on this transformational Thursday with everyone.
Right. Yeah. And so I really love the good wolf and the bad wolf story. I think it's a great way to really understand our thinking patterns. And I'm excited to teach you all a little bit about how human evolution has shaped our brains and how this knowledge and really understanding it can improve the quality of our lives and even our outlook on life. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the story of the good wolf and the bad wolf, I'm just going to start off with kind of explaining it for all of you, and it can even be a refresher for those of you who do know it. But really, here's how it goes. There is a well-known story from Cherokee tradition. A grandfather tells his grandson, "Inside each of us, there are two wolves. One is filled with fear, anger, stress, and self-doubt. The other is calm, kind, hopeful, and strong." The grandson asks, "Which wolf wins?" The grandfather replies, "The one you feed." So this tale reminds us that the thoughts and behaviors that we nurture, whether they're helpful or unhelpful, become stronger. So in Flowly, we learn to feed the wolf that brings us safety, calm, and freedom in order to break patterns of fight and flight and help us move into rest and recovery. So this is a parallel that I think is familiar to many of you, but if it's not, I really wanted to present it to you to really pave the groundwork for what we'll be talking about today. And so when we think about the good wolf and we think about the bad wolf, we wonder, often many of us wonder, why is it that most of us find the bad wolf has come so naturally to us? And why is it so hard to get rid of? Whereas on the other hand, it requires a lot of effort for some of us to feed the good wolf. Really a starting place that I want to ensure to communicate with all of you is that you are not alone in this. This is incredibly common human experience, really because it's an evolutionary trait. And that's something that we're going to get into today, is understanding the way that we think, and sometimes when it feels unhelpful, is actually rooted in our own human evolution. And gaining a better understanding of this allows you first to not be so hard on yourself for the way that you think, but also allows you to be intentional in adjusting your mindset and your outlook. So humans are biologically and neurologically predisposed to focus on threats, danger, and negative stimuli. This is because over the course of evolution, attending to the bad was a survival mechanism. Humans are wired to pay more attention to negative stimuli than positive ones. Missing a potential reward, like fruit on a tree, could mean hunger, whereas missing a threat, like a predator, could mean death. So with the cost of ignoring negatives was higher than ignoring positive ones, which really shaped the human brain to err on the side of caution. For this reason, negativity is truly a survival advantage. Those who reacted more strongly to danger or had a greater sensitivity to danger signals had higher survival odds. This developed a better safe than sorry wiring system, where to assume the worst, it was to help you survive. Most of the time, our brains work on predictions about the future rather than passively reacting to sensory input. So this process happens quickly and almost without thought. a good example of this is maybe thinking, imagine going camping and hearing rustling in the leaves or the woods behind you, and that can send you running before you even have the thought to slow down and think, is that a bunny? Is it a bear? Our brains work on these predictions to protect us. So it will often assume the worst, assume that the thing behind me might be dangerous, because me assuming that and running based on that thought is more likely to protect me and ensure my survival. So I provided a bit of the historical background, and I'll provide a bit of the neurobiological explanation for the negativity bias. And I'll be very brief with this because I know it's, neuroscience isn't everyone's favorite. But the amygdala plays a central role in the threat detection, activating rapidly when danger cues appear. And if you can see this little arrow right here, this is really highlighting where the amygdala is in the brain. But bad news or threats light up brain activity more intensely than the equivalent good news. So our brains are much more responsive and much more active when it receives something negative, whether that's fear-based or whether that's a criticism, whatever it is, that bad news lights up our brains much more intensely than the opposite, something positive, something warm, something joyful. And negative information is processed more quickly and stored more deeply in the memory. So all of this is to say, a few takeaway points with this is the bad is stronger than the good in how we process events. Negative events, emotions, and memories stick longer and feel more powerful than positive ones because of the way that our brains process this information. And so an example of this is a single criticism that we receive can outweigh 10 compliments that we receive. And so knowing this is really important, knowing how much our brains cling to negativity and how much additional effort it takes for our brains to receive the positive to the same degree that it receives the negative. So again, the speed and depth which negative information is processed was historically necessary for survival. This is something that we needed back then, but no longer feels as helpful. So we needed to remember what berries were poisonous, where the deadly snakes were, what it sounds like when predators are approaching. But this attention to negative cues and this constant scanning for fear and for threat isn't as adaptive in our current daily life. And that's something that we'll get into now as I'll pass this over to Gage.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, continuing on with what Lauren stated there and talking about these evolutionary things that were really pivotal for our survival as humans earlier on, and now shifting more our focus to modern day and what modern day society and situations tend to look like. We don't need these things to happen so intently or to show up in certain situations, but yet they still contribute to significant amounts of bias as we work through our day. Now that we've kind of taken the time to recognize this evolutionary purpose behind negative bias, we'll move forward and highlight how it influences our thoughts, our feelings, and behaviors. So you can shift over to the next slide there, Lauren. Okay. Thank you. Before jumping into kind of the meat of this slide, I want to define what bias is for folks. It's a popular term that folks may have had experience with or at least heard of, but want to provide a pretty general definition. First here is bias is a disproportionate inclination or prejudice towards or against a person, a group, an idea, a thing that interferes with impartial judgment. It's often based or rooted in stereotypes, past experiences, rather than factual knowledge or concrete evidence. And the important thing to recognize too is that bias can be conscious or unconscious. So Lauren talking about the neurobiology that's involved with, this negative type of bias that shows up is it's not even always a conscious thought in terms of when we're thinking about, oh, I'm going to view this from a negative way, or, oh, I'm going to kind of decide to, take in this information in a negative way. A lot of times we are just taking in that information in a very unconscious type of response, especially if we're running through our very busy days. We can move forward there, Lauren.
Okay.
Thinking about slide 10 here and how it impacts memory. We discussed already about the amygdala is essential to processing fear and arousal. But also boosts memory encoding by interacting with the hippocampus, kind of like the memory hub of our brain. Stronger amygdala activity during like events creates stronger memories in its encoding. So thinking about things that are very high in regarding emotion, so it could be fear, it could be anxiety. And when those feelings are stimulated and are creating these, more activity within the amygdala, it begins to create a stronger reference point within our brain, a stronger memory that gets more deeply encoded, easier to reference in the future types of things. Coming back to that evolutionary piece of, oh, if you ate a handful of berries and then you found yourself very sick, lethargic afterward, that's a very emotional experience. There's a lot of activity that's going on in the brain, which really draws upon a stronger memory in the future of, oh, I know that the berries of that color or that shape could be really dangerous to me, so I'm not going to eat those. Mm-hmm. Also recognizing that both positive and negative emotions enhance encoding. So it's not just the negative ones like fear, but also positive ones. The thing to recognize here is, but they kind of have an impact of encoding themselves in different ways. So negative emotions tend to be a bit more narrow in terms of how we remember them. Memory is in very much more detail, so you might be able to reference like very specific things around, within that moment, very specific details. And positive ones tend to be a bit more broad regarding our attention, like a bigger picture. When I think of this, I tend to think of like family members or past experiences where I tend to think of like my grandmother and like, oh, I think of like these positive moments at my grandmother's house. And it's less about very like specific memories of like being at her home, but like just this very general big picture of positive feelings of being with her. Or, oh, I remember about this kind of time every day, we would wind down and read a book or something. But it's often not like a very distinct like specific date or a detailed place exactly within her home, but it's more of this very just overall positive feeling, emotion associated with that type of memory.
Mm-hmm. And Gage, we had a comment in the chat that said, I heard that scents are a good recall or good for recalling memories as well. And I think, I think that's true. And sometimes it's interesting, like this thing that Gage just pointed to of negative emotions narrow what our memories really stick to. So if you had a really difficult experience, you might recall how the air felt, how your skin felt, all of those sensory and tactical things. Sometimes you remember the sounds very clearly. Whereas when we think of these more positive experiences, like Gage was talking about, of this sensation of, or the feeling of spending time with my grandmother, that loving environment, it's more so like that big picture feeling of love that he recalls, and less so really those like sensory and tactical things that came as clearly as they do with negative memories. Particularly when we think about this, we also think about trauma, and trauma related memories are often very specific in those details that are associated with it.
Yeah, I love that point, especially in recognizing, I tend to try to go down to like the bare bones and purpose and functions of things, and thinking about our senses, it's our way of our brains bringing in information. So whether it's through sight, sound, taste, touch, etc., that's how the brain is gathering information from a situation, from an environment. So in a negative event where that focus and memory is very narrow, it's going to rely very heavily on very apparent or present things, whether it is a smell, whether it is a sound, or something like that.
Mhm. All right, and I'll move forward here.
Thinking about interpretation. Negativity bias shapes interpretations that we make. We are uncertain about a presentation or an interview and how it went, the kind of impression that we made on someone. And we often interpret, let me make sure I didn't lose you guys for a moment there. I think my internet just went in and out. Lauren, are you able to hear me okay still?
Yeah, I still have
Okay,
you.
thank you. We often interpret ambiguous situations in a more negative light. And I tend to think of this in a situation of very just kind of natural or routine things that you may be engaging in, whether it's a trip to the gas station and you walk in and you grab yourself a drink and maybe a candy bar on your way out. And it's a pretty just neutral situation in general, but we're far more likely to hone in or notice a change in like the tone of voice or get an impression, or we're interpreting the body language of the cashier in a negative way compared to something that's probably fairly neutral and doesn't actually present much meaning for us in terms of a threat or danger or anything like that. But because of this negativity bias, we are far more likely to pick up on subtle things like that are overall pretty neutral and ambiguous in a more negative way compared to even interpreting them in a positive way.
Mhm. All right, I'll move forward.
And then thinking about decision making. With a more fear-based outlook, it can feel like, stakes are high in every situation. And we can overemphasize the implications for something if it doesn't work out as we hope, really because losses feel so much more powerful than gains do. It's this idea and, our, a general kind of approach of being more risk adverse to things. And, connecting back to what Lauren said earlier at the beginning of, this evolutionary approach of being risk adverse, because risks over the course of evolution could mean death. So putting so much more emphasis in the possibility of loss, or even putting the weight behind losses that we experience over the course of life over positive moments or things where we've achieved or gains over the course of our life as well. This bias can influence financial choices. It can show up in relationships. It can even show up in like political opinions and thoughts. It can have a bias on different belief systems and just really how we navigate our world as a whole as individuals.
Mm-hmm. And the one thing I'll add to this as well is that one thing that I found in the clinical work that I've done in the past is that this negativity bias and how it impacts our decision making often makes our lives smaller and smaller. As we become more risk averse, we really hone in on what feels like our comfort zone and what feels safe. And oftentimes that continues to shrink. It might be that you're a person that struggles maybe in social situations. And so you initially say, I won't do any public speaking. I won't do anything that feels really outside of what's comfortable. And then as you maybe get further into this negativity bias and this anxiety focused thinking, you might say, you know what, well, even meeting new people feels like a lot, and even going to new spaces feels like a lot. And so rather than challenging these thoughts and challenging these decisions, you're leaning into your anxiety and letting it shrink your life and make decisions for you ultimately.
Yeah, Lauren, you put my last point on a T for me here of this fearful mindset, and when it's so present, really influences our decision, and we can really be a bit more reactionary to situations, or we're reacting to a feeling that we're having. And a lot of times that pulls us away and makes us less rooted in like critical thinking or problem solving. And even more so to kind of what Lauren was speaking about is like personal values, things that matter to us, things that are really important to us. if we're feeling kind of stuck, or we're noticing we're stuck in this more fear-based outlook, a lot of times it can pull us away from things that really deeply matter to us, or things that we want to grow towards or work towards, because we're finding ourselves to be so reactionary to that, to that negative wolf.
Mhm.
Self-talk and beliefs. I really like this slide. I think this is a very relatable slide for everyone, whether it's something that's common for you or just something that I think most people have experienced over the course of their life at different times. And negative self-talk and negative beliefs about, oneself it's one of the most prevalent forms of negative bias. I guess the positive thing about it is it's also one of the things we have the greatest ability to change and control over. Many of us aren't aware of the negative ways that we speak to ourselves and the critical lens we can view ourselves through, because that's can be more of our normal internal experience. But when we start to become a bit more aware of the negativity and the negative quality of our thoughts, it creates a bit of opportunity for us to begin to challenge them and change them. Negative self-talk is harmful in its impact in the way we see ourselves, the way we see the world. But now we can figure out how to change that. And I think, this slide's important because I think it recognizes both the internal impact that negative self-talk has on ourselves. We begin to have a very distorted negative view of ourselves, how we interact throughout the world, whether it's in relationships, whether it's at work, whether it's with family. And then also kind of noting that as that kind of negative internal perspective about ourselves builds, it gives us a very distorted negative view of the world around us too. That lens becomes kind of so thick, and now we're really viewing and interpreting and taking in information, like previous slides have stated, as and potentially neutral, but really viewing them in a more negative lens, whether it's the world being out to get us, or negative things happening to us because we deserve it, or we're used to it, or that's just kind of how the world is. I think this slide highlights that relationship between the internal and external world a lot.
And one thing I'll add into this before I'm moving forward is when we really think about a lot of this, we're talking about what's within our control, within our internal experience. We recognize that we have no control and no influence really over how other people see us. We can think that we, as nice as we can be, or as generous as we can be, whatever it is, that we can force other people to like us, or force them to view us through a certain lens, and kind of find ways to ensure that we get external forms of validation. But ultimately, it's unreliable, it's inconsistent, and it's outside of our control. And so the way that we actually have the ability to influence how we feel and have a sturdy sense of self-worth is through that internal piece of through being able to recognize, when does my own self-talk tear me down, and what beliefs do I hold about myself that make me feel worse and make my experience in life more difficult? Because those are the pieces that really we have the ability to work with. All of those external things that we look to for validation of our careers, our social standing, whatever it is, are things that change throughout our lifetimes and things that we have no control over. And so really, like, as providers, the piece that we really want people to work on is this piece, this internal piece of self-talk and beliefs.
Absolutely.
And so, leaving on that good note, turning into, so how do we overcome the bad wolf? We really got into what can feel, I don't know, even more gloomy, of recognizing, oh gosh, there's this evolutionary holdover with my brain that makes me view things this way. And even though it no longer feels adaptive, I no longer am, being chased by tigers out in the wild, I'm in the office, I'm in the day-to-day, and I'm still finding that the bad wolf is controlling so much of my thinking, sometimes we can feel a bit helpless. But really, the purpose of this was to provide an understanding. So you know what you're working with. You're not just under this perception that, you know what, I'm just a negative thinker, or you know what, I just can't be as positive as I want to be, and that's my own flaw, or my own, my own character trait that I can never change. And that's not true. We really present this to show this is an evolutionary feature of humans that we all have to deal with. And so recognizing that is our baseline, that is our starting point, that we will have this part of us that always wants to think in this way. But that being the starting point, we know how to move forward. And so really, it's knowing our brain's natural tendency to amplify the negative. We can make intentional counteraction efforts. As I was saying, we know where our baseline is. We're not telling ourselves like our baseline should be somewhere else. I should be naturally a positive, happy-go-lucky person, and I'm not, and I don't know why. No, we're providing clarity on, okay, as humans, this is our starting point, and this is how we can work with ourselves and adjust our thinking to really build from that. And so the first step is to recognize the negativity bias is not our enemy, even though it might sound like it from everything that we've said so far. The inner demon of the brain, which is the negativity bias, is just an evolutionary holdover. It is your brain's attempt to protect you, even though it feels unhelpful. Even your self-critical thoughts are your brain's attempt to help you survive socially. However, our brain doesn't always grasp nuance. So an embarrassing moment may cause your brain to activate a fear response the same way it would as if you were being chased by a tiger, or if you were in critical danger. In an embarrassing moment, your brain may tell you that you must fit in order to survive, where actually you can, in our current world, you can survive just fine without fitting in. And so some of these things are just recognizing like this evolutionary holdover is our brain's attempt to keep us alive, but it's almost working with old data. It's almost working with information that it had back in the prehistoric era of, okay, so we socially needed to fit in, or else the people around us wouldn't keep us alive, and we needed other people to keep us alive at that point in time. Or any threat perceived in that time could kill you. And that could have all been very well and true at that point in time. And that's still the data that our brain is often working with, but it's recognizing that our brain is still just trying to keep us alive, but it's working off of information that isn't accurate. And so the challenge and the opportunity with this is to recognize that this is a faulty thinking pattern and to deliberately correct for it.
Yeah, I think the thing I like to add in thinking about this is remembering that it's not a malicious type of thing. It is an evolutionary holdover, and two negatives do not make a positive. So being overcritical of yourself and judging this part of your brain for making mistakes, or doing honestly as it has been designed to do throughout evolution, does not tend to work. That in what Lauren's saying, and simply being able to recognize the things that we've shared so far, and providing your brain a bit of grace and understanding of, okay, and acknowledging what it's trying to do, even if it's not being fully accurate and serving us now.
Mm-hmm. No, and I'm really glad that you said that, Gage, because sometimes we end up beating ourselves up for beating ourselves up, or we get frustrated with ourselves for this anxious and fear-based thoughts. And really it's what it is. It's being able to take a step back and you're like, oh, thanks, brain. Thanks for trying to keep me alive. Even though the way that you did it, just made me, anxious about something I don't need to. If you take a step back and rather than scolding your brain, just saying, all right, thanks, wasn't that helpful, but thank you. So sometimes even using humor or sarcasm are more adaptive ways to respond to this, rather than just reinforcing that negativity and reinforcing that frustration or anger. All right. So how to correct your negativity bias. So the first step in correcting this bias is to notice when it's occurring. That's the first piece. Notice when your brain is overemphasizing the negatives, or almost when it feels like you're wearing what might be like the opposite of rose-colored glasses. If you just find that you almost have this kind of like cloud looming over you, notice when you're in that headspace. Notice when negativity just seems to be the thing that's leading your perception. So once you notice it, make intentional effort to redirect your thoughts and create new neural pathways. And I know we talk about that quite a lot within Flowly, of creating new neural pathways, and not everyone loves neuroscience, but what we mean when we say that is create a new way of being. Your brain can only really function based on the neural pathways that exist. So instead of just operating off of this old way of thinking, if my natural old way of thinking was to be self-critical and assume the worst, we're creating a new alternative where there's an option for you to say, you know what, like maybe today's going to be a good day, and maybe I don't have to be so hard on myself. We know that negative thoughts are more power than positive ones, so we have to counteract this with a focused effort. So label the positives. It says out loud, and it's very helpful for it to be out loud, but I know sometimes we struggle with that. Maybe, I don't know, you're at work, you're in a meeting, you're out in public. It doesn't feel like the best time to start talking to yourself out loud when those negative thoughts come up. So what you can do is it can be externally, or it can be internally, or write it down, maybe open up your notes app. But you really have to be intentional to voice the positives. So, and what it says on 3 is balancing the ratio. It has to be at least 4-to-1. So I have to come up with at least 4 positives to counteract the negative, because our brains are so hooked onto the negative. We have to give it more positive to balance it out. And so to provide an example of what this can look like, if an example might be, if I make a simple mistake and my immediate thought is, gosh, I'm so stupid. And I recognize like, ugh, okay, so I made a mistake and I had this thought, I'm in this negative bubble, I have this negative cloud that's telling me unkind things about myself. The first step, again, is to recognize the mental space that I'm in and engage in counter thoughts. So 4 counter thoughts that I might have in response to this that counteract the idea that, gosh, I'm so stupid, might be, you know what, everyone makes mistakes. It might be, making a mistake doesn't take away from my intelligence. Or it might be, actually, I'm a pretty smart person. Or it can be, you know, I can make mistakes and I can still feel okay about myself. But it's important to have multiple of them, because that initial idea, that initial thought of, gosh, I'm so stupid, my brain really just hung on to. And so to get my brain to release its grip of that negative thought, I have to feed it multiple positive thoughts. And with this practice, I can recognize that the negative thought is not a fact. It's just a temporary thought and feeling. Recognize that these thoughts that we have aren't ultimate truths. They're not facts. They're just things that our brain come up with, and they're temporary. Our thoughts and feelings are temporary, and they're not facts. And that's an important thing. And point 4 here is just recognizing that they're not ultimate truths, they're not ultimate facts, and they're not forever. I'm not going to always feel like I'm stupid for making a mistake. This is a fleeting moment, and I can help the moment be even more fleeting by counteracting it with positive thoughts. And lastly, oh, sorry, go ahead, Gage.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to address a question in the chat, but we go ahead and make your final point.
Okay. Lastly, it's important to savor and repeat the positives to help them stick. So when you feel good about yourself or about life, or you have a small achievement, savor these things, make an effort for them to stick in your brain, because we know that those, you know, we'll wake up at night, or we'll like have have a tough day where we think of the most embarrassing thing we ever did in fourth grade, or the embarrassing moments we had years and years ago. These things can seem to come to us so quickly and so naturally that we don't typically sit there and wake up in the middle of the night and remember a really positive thing someone said to us a few years ago. But we want to put in the effort for those things to stick, hopefully as much or even more than those negative memories stick. So sorry, Gage, go ahead.
Yeah, before I address the question, the other part of savoring that I like to add to is the power of sharing. I think we have maybe all fallen into this, or a tendency of, getting around friends or loved ones and sharing about the struggles of the day or the challenges that are going on in life. And oftentimes our conversations can kind of gravitate in that direction. And recognizing the power of sharing positive experience, whether it's personal, whether it's achievements, whether it's progress, being able to share those with others is another way of allowing them to stick within our minds.
Absolutely.
Question in the chat asks, where does disassociation fit in with this? It doesn't feel quite negative. It feels more like nothing.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. So disassociating is a survival mechanism. It is a response of an overactivated nervous system as well. So we disassociate because the current situation, whether it's external, so the environment, or internally our thoughts and emotions, are too much to cope with. And so then in order to survive, we have to pull away. We have to numb ourselves. We have to shut down. And so that's really how dissociating comes in. It is negative, but it's a negative numbness. It's a numbness that helps us to survive something. And I will say, dissociating helps people to survive trauma. And so sometimes people otherwise would not have been able to endure something. So their brain almost did it to help them survive. The same way that some of these, this negativity bias shows up in order to help us survive. Dissociation shows up to help us survive. But it's something that then we want to get ourselves out of fight or flight. We want to get ourselves into a safe place where our brains and bodies learn, okay, I don't have to shut off to be able to endure what's going on around me. Does that answer your question? I can't see the chat. Okay, perfect. What was I going to say? So we're going to get into some take-home strategies, but actually one strategy that we didn't include in this, but that Gage, you reminded me when you said the savoring piece on sharing those positive things. Sharing points of gratitude with other people, I think, is a really excellent way to do that. And this is, I'm not sponsored in any way, but I found this app called Gratitude Plus, which is a social gratitude sharing app, which is just something that's so nice that I found, like a way to stay like socially connected, but specifically the only thing that you do is share a few things that you're grateful for that day. And you get to see what other people are saying that they were grateful for. And I think that that's a really good example, a really good, easy way for you to get involved with that savoring piece and engage in that community positivity and that community gratitude that Gage was speaking of. Yeah, I'll jump into the next piece. Or Gage, hand it off to you.
Yeah, let's think about take-home strategies, things that we all can do right away or start working towards to help overcome this negativity bias. Thinking first about reframing setbacks. Negative feedback can often be perceived as threatening, which then creates like a defensiveness within our body of whether we begin to come combative or come up with excuses. It often generates like a defensive response within us. In a way to combat some of this is seeing mistakes as opportunities for learning rather than evidence of failure or evidence of like, oh, this is a pattern that I'm not good enough or that I can't do this, but more of opportunities of, well, what can I learn from this? What can I take away from this? This interrupts the brain's tendency to dwell on a loss or dwell on a mistake. The other thing that I like to add to this is to shift away from criticism and looking more towards opportunity and learning. And the thing that I like to add with opportunity and learning is also to seek understanding and support. That in moments where we may not meet an expectation, or we have feelings of disappointment, or we don't achieve to what we were hoping toward, instead of falling into this pattern of criticism, seek opportunities to learn. And the best ways for us to learn is trying to gain more understanding and also seeking support. And that support piece for me is so pivotal of what do I need to do, or am I able to get some additional help or support around me so that I can grow. That support piece and having loved ones or having or utilizing other resources can be such a strong faster and fostering a bit more of a growth mindset rather than getting stuck in a failure or a mistake and then just kind of falling down that spiral of a setback. The other one, practicing gratitude daily. Lauren already began to kind of speak about the power of gratitude, writing down or mentally rehearsing good moments, and with that helps them stick longer and become a bit more ingrained in memory. The thing that I honestly encourage clients directly to do, it's part of practice when I talk about gratitude, is being able to include loved ones in sharing expressions of gratitude. That whether it's a partner, whether it's children, whether it's parents, including them in opportunities of gratitude throughout the day. So whether it's at the dinner table or maybe you're winding down with your spouse at the end of the night, and simply taking a couple moments to sit with one another and talk about things that you appreciate over the course of the day, things that you're grateful for. And they can be as specific or general at all, but really just pausing for a moment and being really intentional of, I'm going to take a couple minutes here with someone that really means something to me. And sharing and expressing gratitude can be such a powerful tool, and it can combat this negativity bias that we're talking. And I also think it's very powerful in strengthening relationships and being able to be in a vulnerable space like that with someone. Another strategy here is savor positive positives deliberately. Since we've already talked about the bad things tend to linger on longer, a strategy to help savor is thinking about pausing, letting good experiences sink in, let them linger, allow 10 to 20 seconds for them to begin to ingrain themselves. Before going down this therapist route, I had a background in culinary arts, almost the path that I chose. So I absolutely love and adore food. And I think of that moment of pausing when you get something that is absolutely delicious and you begin to savor that first bite and you're noticing all the textures, the flavors, and things that begin to happen. And with that, it begins to create attachments to that positive experience. You're noticing the details. We already talked about how positive experiences tend to be a bit more broad. And if we can pause and allow positive and good experiences to linger, we're able to provide a bit more detail to them. We're able to also include some of that narrow focus detail things that tend to happen naturally with negative experiences.
Gage, I'll add something to this as well. Someone I know has a travel journal where every time they go on vacation, they'll use a daily journal because they know that, things happen, time goes by, and you forget how nice those moments were, those memories you might have photos of, but being able to document like wonderful days that you've had, whether that's a travel journal or whether it's like a good days journal where you open it up and write down, a particularly good day or particularly good thing that happened. Those I think are like good ways and maybe simple ways to be able to engage in this savoring piece, knowing that, these positive moments won't stick to us as easily as negative moments, putting in that effort to even journal out those positive pieces.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think of, when a picture maybe come up as like a reminder or just like, hey, back in this year, you were doing this right now type of thing. And you get that moment of oh wow, that really was a positive experience. Wow, I really was enjoying myself then. And what else was I doing at that moment? And then often, at least for myself, realizing it took that picture, that reminder to actually make me think of those things again, that they weren't likely just to come naturally in my mind at this time of year. So having a journal, I absolutely love that idea. Something else here of media consumption. I know in our modern time, in our society, we are surrounded by media constantly. Constant information, whether it's coming in from television, from TV, from billboards, just we're constantly surrounded by media and information coming in. And the recommendation that we have for here is controlling your input, controlling the amount that you take in, being really intentional around the times that you're trying to consume media to the best you can, and also being really intentional about the type of content you're exposing yourself to. Most of us are familiar with how social media works and the algorithms that show up, whether it's on like YouTube, TikTok, or anything like that. And pausing for a minute and kind of beginning to look at your social media content and what are you exposing yourself to over the course of the day? Even when you may find yourself trying to wind down or sit, in that moment, are you exposing yourself to things that are positive or things that align with your value or things that are uplifting? Or are you putting yourself in spaces of tragedy or stress or fear? So thinking about media kind of in multiple ways. And the last thing is creating positive rituals. I think we have a question around social media. I don't want to jump too far ahead here.
Sorry, I think I missed that. Okay, let me read this out to you. How do you balance social media use when it feels like most of the people who understand me the most are online and not near me physically?
It's a really good question.
I can take this and then you can chime in,
Sure.
Gage. But and we live in such technology focused, environment, and sometimes our jobs and our relationships and friendships, all of these things are so interconnected with being online that it's not always possible to say, okay, maybe I'll just unplug, I'll go off the grid. And so it's then recognizing what types of like technology uses leaves me feeling more empty and drained. Are there certain things that are actually fill my cup up? I feel more optimistic and more engaged with my friends in the world through using media, because that's definitely true. I mean, you can find really excellent groups who are really uplifting one another. And I think it's really good to find, okay, what are meaningful and fulfilling ways that I can use media? Can it connect me to things that, like Gage said, are within my values? Or do I need to be more aware of actually the feeling that I have after I log off? Is it that I have spent a lot of time mindlessly doom scrolling and I feel a bit empty from this media consumption? Or is it that I've been consuming a lot of things that fill me with even more existential fear and dread? And if so, how can I intentionally then navigate, set limits with myself of, if this is the case, then can I, if I'm spending 4 hours online every day and a lot of it feels really taxing, can I set a limit with myself to reduce it, maybe to start 1 or 2 and see then how I'm feeling? Gage, I don't know if you have anything to add with that.
I don't think so. I think you summed it up very well.
Okay.
And her last recommendation here of creating positive rituals, engaging in interpersonal gratitude, recognition, appreciation, regularly sharing positive feedback. Also thinking of, the positive ritual of regularly checking in with yourself, creating a pattern or a time of your day where you're checking in about your wants and needs. How am I feeling today? Is there something that I need? Is there something that I desire today? And catering to those parts of yourself. And then lastly, creating space for joy, laughter, and creativity. In moments where we find joy or we're laughing without effort, for one, is incredible for our body, our nervous system. It's a great place to be relaxed, calm when we're laughter, a wonderful time to feel safe. And I also love the word creativity. When our brain is in a space of creativity and kind of wonder and imagination of what is possible, it's not so much in a place of fear or dread. It's coming back more to the positive and optimistic mindset of possibility compared to the fear of what could happen, if that makes sense.
Mhm. All right, thank you, Gage. Really, so the last piece that I want to cover is the confirmation bias. I know we're talking a lot about biases today, and Gage gave a wonderful explanation of what biases are. So we talked about the negativity bias. Now we're talking about the confirmation bias and how you can use it to your advantage. So the confirmation bias recognizes that our brains frequently operate based on predictions as a means to really conserve mental energy, which is something that happens to us really without us knowing. It allows us really to like engage in tasks while we're on autopilot. So you're not always fully logged in when you're, let's say, unloading the dishwasher, folding your laundry, driving the same route that you've driven a million times. These actions are based on predictions. Our brains can predict, where things go. So almost your brain has to do less mental effort. And so that's kind of how this process works. Why predictions come about are really to conserve mental energy. But because of this predictive thinking, confirmation bias is really considered to be a thinking shortcut where our brains subconsciously seek out information that support our beliefs. It also leads us to interpret information in ways that confirm our beliefs. So, for instance, if you had the belief that today is going to be a bad day, your brain is geared towards finding evidence to support that belief. Whereas, alternatively, if you have the belief that, I genuinely think today will be a good day, your brain's going to search for evidence to support that belief. And so the reason that I'm teaching this to you and saying that this is actually an advantage as something that you can use to your advantage is because, there's so many things that we don't have control over, but we do have the ability to be selective in our thinking and to be selective in our beliefs. So, you can say to yourself, like, today is going to be a good day. Today I'm going to find ways to feel connected. Today I'm going to, feel confident about myself. Today I'm going to experience joy, whatever it might be. You setting those beliefs, and people even talk about like setting intentions, you setting out with this mental framework actually primes your brain to seek evidence that support that mindset. And so ultimately with this, and why this can be helpful for you, is sometimes we aren't even aware that we're operating from a negative belief point, and then our brains will find evidence to support it. So we might wake up feeling like we're on the wrong side of the bed, like everything was not the way it should be in the morning. And then we're just kind of in this funk where, people are going to be annoying today. There's going to be traffic. Whatever it is. And so we'll find reasons and find evidence to support us being frustrated on our drive, us being frustrated with, peers, coworkers, us being feeling insecure, whatever it might be. So recognizing I have the power to not control my outside circumstances, but I have the power to at least control what I believe and the expectations that I can set for my life or for my day. And so be selective about your beliefs and then the evidence that you are looking to find. Yeah. Gage, do you have any maybe closing thoughts to add either with this or with the strategies we previously presented?
I don't think so. I think the one thing that always comes to my mind with like confirmation bias is or a lot of beliefs that we have about ourselves of like, oh, I'm not a morning person. And then you kind of seek confirmation, like you seek confirmation throughout every morning of how you are not a morning person. Of, oh, I wake up in a bad attitude, and I'm always so tired, and I'm always like getting out to my car, and just like we begin to like collect evidence to support that idea.
Yeah.
Compared to mornings can just be kind of hard in general. We're getting out of bed, we're getting out to work, and we're like rushing. And it may not be something that's so attached to our identities in that type of belief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's so many, that's a great example of being like the belief that I'm not a morning person, the belief that like we have so many that are tied into our insecurities as well that we find evidence for. Like we will, again, as Gage spoke to earlier, is that the negativity bias leads us to interpret ambiguous stimuli in a negative lens. So the really, like, let's say we have this idea where I'm not a likable person. And so when people have a neutral face, I will assume that that means because they're disinterested, because they don't like me. I'm making all of these assumptions and interpretations based on this belief that I have that we have no way of knowing are true or not. And so, yeah, I think these two biases like tie in really well together, but also knowing that you have a lot of power to challenge them. You have a lot of power to challenge the negative biases that you have for the confirmation bias. And you also have a lot of agency to, now that you know, a negative outlook isn't because I'm a grumpy person. It is an evolutionary trait. I can then know, okay, so this is how my brain works. Now I'm aware of how my brain works, and I can make decisions to positively influence my outlook now that I know my baseline. And I think that summarizes all of our tools for today. I hope this was informative and helpful. We finished it out right on time. But if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take them. I will end the recording just in case, to protect any questions you might have if you don't want those shared.